For decades, the United States stood at the center of the global system. It had the world's largest economy, the strongest military, a powerful currency, and a network of alliances spread across the planet. Then, quietly, another country began changing: China. In just a few decades, China went from a relatively poor, largely agricultural economy to an industrial and technological giant. Today, China is not simply selling products to the world. It is building technology, developing advanced industries, expanding its military, investing in countries across the world, and competing with the United States for influence. But this story is not really about two countries fighting for a title. It is about how the world changed, and why the decisions made in China more than 40 years ago are still shaping global politics today. So, how did China rise so quickly? And why has its rise become such a major challenge for America? The story begins in 1978. After decades of economic isolation and political upheaval, China began a new period of reform and opening up. Under Deng Xiaoping, China gradually introduced market-oriented reforms while keeping the Communist Party at the center of political power. The goal was simple: make the economy grow, allow more trade, attract investment, and improve living standards. The transformation was enormous. According to the World Bank, since the beginning of the reform and opening up period in 1978, China's economy grew at an average rate of more than 9% a year for decades. The World Bank also estimates that close to 800 million people were lifted out of extreme poverty during this transformation. China was no longer looking inward. It was opening its doors to the global economy, and the world was ready to enter. Foreign companies began investing in China. Factories expanded. Cities grew. Ports became enormous centers of international trade. Millions of workers moved into manufacturing and other urban industries. China had something global companies desperately wanted: a huge workforce, a rapidly developing industrial base, and access to one of the world's largest potential markets. Slowly, production moved toward China. Electronics, clothing, machinery, consumer goods, industrial equipment. China became deeply connected to global supply chains. But Beijing wanted more than factories. It wanted China to become a major economic power. And one event accelerated that transformation. December 11, 2001, China officially became a member of the World Trade Organization. It was the 143rd member. Joining the WTO connected China even more deeply to international trade. Chinese companies gained greater access to global markets. Foreign companies gained greater access to China. And international trade became one of the engines of China's economic rise. The numbers tell the story. In 2025, China's customs authorities reported total exports of about $3.77 trillion and imports of about $2.58 trillion. That meant China recorded a trade surplus of roughly $1.19 trillion for the year. But the most important change was not simply how much China was selling. It was what China was learning to build. For years, many people saw China mainly as a place where products designed elsewhere were manufactured. But China wanted to move higher up the technological ladder. That meant investing heavily in research, engineering, infrastructure, and advanced manufacturing. And this is where the story becomes much more interesting. China began competing in electric vehicles, batteries, solar technology, telecommunications, robotics, artificial intelligence, and other advanced industries. The Chinese government has also made technological self-reliance a major strategic goal. The scale of investment is significant. China's National Bureau of Statistics reported that national research and development spending reached about 3.93 trillion yuan in 2025. That was equal to 2.8% of China's GDP. This does not mean China automatically leads in every technology. It doesn't. The United States still has enormous strengths in areas such as advanced technology, finance, research universities, and high-end innovation. But China's ability to invest at huge scale has changed the competition. China is no longer simply trying to catch up. In several industries, Chinese companies are competing directly with companies from the United States, Europe, Japan, South Korea, and other advanced economies. And as economic power grew, China's ambitions became more global. In 2013, Beijing introduced the Belt and Road Initiative. The basic idea was to expand infrastructure and economic connections between China and countries across Asia and beyond. Railways, ports, roads, energy projects, industrial infrastructure. The initiative became one of the most ambitious international economic programs associated with modern China. For Beijing, Stronger trade and infrastructure connections could support economic development and international cooperation. For other countries, Chinese financing could provide access to infrastructure that might otherwise be difficult to fund. But the Belt and Road Initiative also created concern in Washington and other capitals. Why? Because economic connections can also create geopolitical influence. And China's rise was no longer only an economic story. It was becoming a strategic story. Now consider China's geography. China sits at the center of the Indo-Pacific. It borders 14 countries. It has a long coastline, and it is close to some of the world's most important trade routes. That geography makes the surrounding seas extremely important to China's security. It also brings China into direct strategic competition with the United States and several U.S. allies. The military side of China's rise has been significant as well. China has spent decades modernizing the People's Liberation Army. Its military capabilities have expanded across air, sea, missile, space, and other areas. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, China was the world's second-largest military spender in 2025. SIPRI estimated China's military spending at about $336 billion, compared with about $954 billion for the United States. So America still spends far more. But China's spending has been rising for decades. And SIPRI estimated that Chinese military spending increased by 7.4% in real terms in 2025. This military modernization is closely connected to China's security concerns, and one issue stands above many others: Taiwan. Beijing claims Taiwan is part of China and has not renounced the use of force to achieve unification. Taiwan, meanwhile, has its own democratically elected government and maintains its own armed forces. The United States does not have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but it maintains extensive unofficial relations with the island and provides defensive support under U.S. law. That makes Taiwan one of the most sensitive points in the relationship between Washington and Beijing. And there is another reason Taiwan matters to the entire world: semiconductors. Modern economies depend on advanced chips. They are used in smartphones, computers, vehicles, data centers, communications equipment, and many other technologies. Taiwan is home to a highly important semiconductor manufacturing industry. So a serious crisis around Taiwan would not necessarily remain a regional problem. It could affect global technology and supply chains. This is one reason the United States and China are paying so much attention to advanced technology. The competition is no longer simply about who has more factories. It is about who controls the technologies that may define the next generation of economic and military power. Artificial intelligence, advanced semiconductors, quantum technologies, robotics, telecommunications, electric vehicles, and space technology. Washington has introduced restrictions on China's access to certain advanced technologies, especially technologies considered important for national security. Beijing, in response, has pushed harder for technological self-reliance. The result is a competition that increasingly looks like a race. But there is something important that is often missed. China and America are not completely separate worlds. They are deeply connected. American consumers buy Chinese-made products. Chinese companies depend on international markets. American and Chinese businesses have invested in each other's economies. Global supply chains connect companies across continents. So this is not the same as the Cold War between America and the Soviet Union. During the original Cold War, the American and Soviet economic systems were largely separate and openly opposed. Today, America and China compete while remaining economically connected. That makes the relationship more complicated. They can cooperate in some areas and compete intensely in others. But China's rise also faces serious challenges. One of the biggest is demographics. China's population is now shrinking. Official Chinese statistics show that the population fell by about 3.39 million people in 2025. The same data shows that 23% of the population was aged 60 or older. That means China is getting older while its population is becoming smaller. For an economy that relied heavily on a huge working age population, this is an important long-term challenge. China also faces economic problems of its own. Its property sector has experienced a major downturn. Local governments have faced financial pressure, and the country is trying to shift from an economy driven heavily by investment and property toward one that depends more on domestic consumption and higher value industries. So China's rise is not guaranteed to continue at the same speed forever. And this brings us back to America. The United States still has enormous advantages. It has a huge economy, a powerful military, deep financial markets, leading universities, major technology companies, a large network of allies, and the US dollar remains at the center of the international financial system. America also has a major advantage that is difficult to measure with a simple number: its global alliance network. Countries such as Japan, South South Korea, Australia, and many European allies maintain close security relationships with Washington. China has partnerships of its own, but America's formal alliance system remains a major source of influence. So the question is not simply whether China is becoming powerful. It clearly is. The bigger question is what happens when two extremely powerful countries believe their long-term interests are increasingly competing. Will they find ways to manage the rivalry? Or will economic competition turn into a deeper geopolitical confrontation? Nobody can predict the final answer. But one thing is already clear. The world that existed after the end of the Cold War is changing. For many years, the United States had an extraordinary position in global affairs. Today, China is challenging that position economically, technologically, militarily, and diplomatically. But China is not the only country becoming more important. India is rising. Europe remains a major economic power. Japan remains technologically advanced. And countries across Southeast Asia are becoming increasingly important to global trade and geopolitics. The future may therefore not belong completely to America. And it may not belong completely to China. Instead, the world could move toward a more competitive and multipolar system. That is what makes China's rise so important. Because this story is not really about whether one country will become number one. It is about what happens when the balance of power begins to change. China's transformation began with economic reforms in 1978. Its global integration accelerated after joining the WTO in 2001. Its technological ambitions grew. Its military capabilities expanded. Its international economic relationships became broader. And today, its competition with the United States is shaping decisions in Washington, Beijing, Tokyo, Brussels, New Delhi, and many other capitals. The most important question of the 21st century may not be, will China become powerful? China already is. The real question is this: can the United States and China compete without allowing competition to become conflict? Because if these two powers manage their rivalry peacefully, the global economy could continue to benefit from cooperation. But if the relationship breaks down, the consequences could reach far beyond their borders. Technology, trade, financial markets, supply chains, security, and the future of the international system itself. China's rise is not the end of America's story, and America's power is not the end of China's story. It is the beginning of a new chapter in world history, a chapter where two great powers are learning how to live in the same world, and the choices they make today could shape that world for decades to come.